Well, it's a joy to be with you here tonight. I'd ask you, if you haven't already done so, to turn with me to Ephesians chapter 2. We'll be looking primarily at the first 10 verses of Ephesians chapter 2. Before we begin, let's just bow our heads in a word of prayer. Lord, we just thank you so much for this local church that you've raised up so many years ago and kept faithful to God's word. So many churches today that had a good start have compromised and are not where they ought to be, not where they once were. And Lord, we've been through some pretty strange times lately, and we still are going through, and it may get even worse. We don't know. But I pray that, Lord, this local church and these dear people would stand faithful. And Lord, bless the pastor. As having been a pastor myself, I understand somewhat of the burden that a pastor carries. And I pray that you would keep him true to your word. And Lord, bless him as he leads this church, as he leads his family. And as we open up God's word tonight, I pray that the Spirit of God would speak to our hearts in a very personal way, that Jesus Christ would be honored and glorified. We pray in his name. Amen. I never assume when I'm standing in a pulpit that everyone I'm speaking to knows the Lord as their personal Savior. What we have here, especially in these first 10 verses, but really in the whole book of Ephesians, is a description, first of all, how God views the unsaved. And that would include how God viewed you and I before we were saved. Now, I know that a number of you probably were saved when you were quite young. And so you didn't see the drastic change that would take place in a person's life when they get saved. I mentioned in Sunday school this morning, I was almost 25 years old when I got saved. Had made a profession of salvation when I was about 5 or 6. The older I got, the more rebellious I got, finally ran away from home. Ended up out in California for a while. Came back home for a little while. It still didn't work, so I joined the Navy. Things went from bad to worse. And a couple years after I got out of the Navy, God got a hold of my heart, and I truly was born again. And the before and after was just so dramatic, and I still look back on it with deep gratitude in my heart that God was patient with me all those years of rebellion, and God was merciful to me and reached out and saved my sinful soul. And as if that wasn't enough, gave me an opportunity to minister in the form of a pastor. Now, don't get me wrong. Whatever God calls you to is just as important, just as lofty in God's sight as being a pastor or a missionary or an evangelist. Whatever God calls us to do in his sight, we're all on the same level, just different gifts and different responsibilities. So we have a description here of how God views a person before they're saved. And if you were saved as a young person, it could stand as a description of what you might have been and how God would have viewed you older in your life. Then also it goes on to say what God has done for us and what he then expects from us. If you're using the outline, before our salvation, we first see our inability in those first 3 verses. And in verse 1, the Bible points out to us that we were helpless. And you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins. We were hopeless. We were dead in God's sight in trespasses and sin, viewed by God as spiritually dead, powerless, incapable of doing anything. Obviously, a person who is physically dead can respond to nothing. They are unable to respond to anything. And that's how God would view the unsaved person spiritually, dead. One of my daughters recently bought not a new car, but a different car, and has been attempting to sell her old car. And so it's been sitting in our driveway for a number of months. I think the quarantine probably took its toll on the length of time to be able to sell the car. But I think it was last week I went out and I decided, well, I probably ought to start the car up and get it running a little bit, drive it around the block a few times. And I went out there, put the key in the ignition, went like this, and you know what happened? Nothing. I should have realized, I should have disconnected the battery a long time ago. But here's all this power under the hood. Here's all these things that this car is capable of doing. But with a dead battery, it can't do anything. Can't play the radio, can't turn on the lights. When my daughter walks in front of the car, I can't honk the horn and scare her. All these things it's able to do, it's powerless. And that's how God views the unsaved person spiritually. They're spiritually dead. They can respond to nothing spiritually. They're dead to God and dead in sin. They can't do anything to better themselves spiritually or alter their destiny. And ultimately, they have no appetite for spiritual things. Now, I remember that time in my life when I was dead in trespasses and sins. And I had no really relationship to God. The only time I ever really reached out to God was when I found myself in trouble. And then I would try to make bargains with God. And God, if you get me out of this, then I'll do such and so. But I never carried out my part of the bargain. And I had no appetite for spiritual things. I came to church later on in life, I should say. Right before I got saved, I started going to church, but I didn't like it. Didn't like the pastor, didn't like the people, didn't like what he had to say. Went for one reason only, and no appetite for spiritual things. I just wanted to live my life the way I wanted to live my life. We were hopeless, and then verses 2 and 3 teach us that we were helpless. Wherein in time past, ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, among whom also we had our conversation, our lifestyle, in time past in the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath, even as others. We were helpless. I see in the first part of verse 2 that we were controlled by our surroundings. Now again, if you were saved early in life, maybe you don't relate to this as much as those of us who were saved as teenagers or adults. But remember what you would have been had you not been saved early in life. I was controlled by my surroundings. My only basis of standards was other unsaved people. I walked according to the course of this world. And that's what happens, the unsaved person. We become like the people that we spend time with. I've seen this happen over and over. Virtually everything I started to do as a preteen and then as a teenager that I knew was wrong, and I knew I was rebelling against what I ought to be doing, was a direct result of the people that I was spending time with, my friends. And I've seen it happen over and over in people's lives. Proverbs says, he that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. And so it's very important what kind of friends we have, what kind of people we spend our time with. We become like the people we spend our time with, and there is great pressure to do so. Especially, I started out as a youth director in 2 different churches. And I saw it time and time again, especially I counseled 2 years summer camp while I was in college. And I saw it over and over and over that the kids who wanted to be accepted by the in crowd had to do what the in crowd did in order to be accepted. And there's great pressure, peer pressure we call it. And so we were helpless. We walked according to the course of this world. That word course means the spirit of the times, literally the spirit of the times. And we lived in accordance with whatever the world currently endorsed. Now, this will age me a little bit, but I got some for instances here. Christian rap. You ever heard of that? That's a misnomer. It used to be years ago Christian rock, and that's a misnomer too. But tattoos and facial rings. And by the way, I'm not saying this necessarily to downplay that particular thing, but it's just an example of why do we do it? It's because other people are doing it. And normally it's that we're looking at the wrong people. And so the way that we dressed and conducted ourselves, the way we wore our hair, and so on and on and on. Virtually, the course of this world dominated every aspect of my thinking and of the thinking of a person before salvation. The course of this world. But the verse goes on to say that not only were we controlled by our surroundings, we were also controlled by Satan. Verse 2, according to the prince of the power of the air, we walked in accord with the prince of the power of the air, Satan himself. Satan is the mastermind, by the way, behind the world's lifestyle. Now, I'm not one to get all wrapped up in conspiracy theories, but I do believe that there is a conspiracy, and it's headed up by the prince of the power of the air. And from all outward appearance, he's doing a great job. But I'm so thankful that greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Amen. And we know where the final victory is going to come. We know who has the final victory. But Satan's the mastermind behind the world's lifestyle. I believe he's the mastermind behind all this craziness that we're seeing in our world today. In fact, the Lord Jesus Christ called him the father of lies in John chapter 18, John 8:44. Jesus said this to the Pharisees, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it." He is the spirit working in the children of disobedience. And to me, that's the only thing that makes sense in all this craziness that we're seeing in our world today. He's working in the children of disobedience. And people do the wicked things they do primarily because of his influence. Now, it's not the only reason they do it, but their lives are characterized by disobedience. Not only were we controlled by our surroundings, not only were we controlled by Satan, but we also were controlled by sensuality, by our own sinful desires. Verse 3, among whom also we all had our conversation in times past in the lust of our flesh. We can't blame Satan when we choose to sin. Will he influence us? Yes. We can't blame the world when we choose to sin. I can't say, well, it was the fault of all my friends that I decided to do the things I know. They influence us, obviously, but it's our own choice to make, isn't it? It's the nature of the flesh to sin. And so Satan uses the world to appeal to our sin nature. And we begin to fulfill the desires of, notice what the verse says, the flesh and the mind. Two ways to gratify the sin nature. I think most of the time we think of sinfulness as something that we do that we ought not to do, or something that we're supposed to do and we don't do it. And so we kind of get the idea, as long as I'm avoiding these things that I ought to be doing, that I'm okay. But there's the desire of the flesh and of the mind. And the inward sin is just as wrong as the outward sin, and a lot of times it's more damaging, more destructive, because, again, as I said this morning in Sunday school, we live the way we do because of the way we think. And so our minds have to be transformed. It's the nature of the flesh to sin. And it's ironic that by yielding to our natural desire to do wrong for self-pleasure, we tragically bring about our own unhappiness. Before I got saved, I did not want to live the way I knew a Christian was supposed to live. I had no desire for that. I was still dead in trespasses and sins. And I wanted to live the way I wanted to live. Ironically, though, I was not happy. I knew I was living in a wrong way. I knew God was not pleased with that. And I was bringing about my own self-destruction. Ironic. It's amazing how many famous people in our world today, entertainers, athletes, are just totally unhappy. And as the song that Pastor quoted this morning, seeking for love somewhere and for meaning in life, and their lives are just a mess. And that's the direction that the flesh leads us. Well, that is Roman numeral 1, our inability, but then Roman numeral 2, we're looking at God's intervention in verses 4 through 6, and I love those first two words in verse 4. But God. Those buts in the Bible are pretty amazing. So here's this terrible picture that God has just painted and that I've tried to depict. But God. And I'm so thankful for the but God. And it wasn't but you. No, but God. In verse 4, we see why God intervened. Because he is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us. Two reasons were given here why God intervened. First of all, because he's rich in mercy. Now, we all know that the Bible teaches that holiness demands that sin be punished. But we also know that mercy finds a way, or provides a way to find forgiveness. And when we follow that way, his mercy is rich. And except for the sin of unbelief, God will forgive you of any sin if you embrace his means of forgiveness. He is rich in mercy. But the second reason that he intervened is because of his great love. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends, and Jesus Christ laid down his life for those who were his enemies, really. His great love led him to provide the means of forgiveness. He loved us, the first part of verse 5 again, even when we were dead in sins. The great love wherewith he loved us, even when we were dead in sins. Because God loves, he is merciful, and because God is merciful and loving, he intervenes. Verses 5 and 6 tell us how God intervened. In verse 5, he rescued us. Even when we are dead in sins, hath quickened us together with Christ. By grace are you saved. Quickened means made alive. He quickened us together with Christ. And so those who are spiritually dead obviously need to be given life. And we became spiritually alive through our union with the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He rescued us. And then first part of verse 6, as if that wasn't enough, he raised us. He raised us up together and made us sit together in heavenly places. Wow. God has raised you and I, Christian, to a new vocation and a new lifestyle. Not superficial changes. He's elevated us to a position otherwise completely unattainable. So he rescued us, but then thirdly, we see that he repositions. He rescued us, he raised us, and the last part of verse 6, he repositioned us. He's made us sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. We're no longer of this world or its sphere of sin and rebellion, and we will one day be physically with him in heaven. I can hardly wait. And even now, though, this is in the present tense, even now we are in God's domain and not Satan's. We are raised present tense and seated present tense. Our destiny is assured. Finally, we come to Roman numeral 3, and that's God's intention. verses 7 through 10. But verse 7 speaks of then, that in the ages to come, he might show the exceeding riches of his grace and his kindness toward us through Christ Jesus. And so when, it's the duration is in the ages to come, then, in the future, in the ages to come. That's the duration. We see the demonstration, what God will show, the exceeding riches of his grace. You know, we could take quite a bit of time right now and just marvel over the exceeding riches of his grace that he's shown to us right now. But we've just begun to understand the exceeding riches of his grace. And I'm not really sure how to understand completely this verse, but it does say in the ages to come. And so I'm wondering if it's going to take us eternity to really begin to comprehend and grasp the exceeding riches of his grace. Just exactly what his grace has purchased for us. What an amazing God we serve. And I wonder what that will look like. Well, his kindness toward us, and just try to imagine what that will be like. And it's all because of our relationship to his Son. Verses 8 through 10 then today. That's in the future. What about now? For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. We see in verse 8, the first part of verse 8, the means of our salvation. Grace through faith. We see the method of our salvation. It's not of ourselves. It's the gift of God. And we see then in verse 10, the mobilization of our salvation. Christian, you are the result of God's workmanship. And that word workmanship means something made or created. You can tell a lot about an individual by what they are capable of creating. If I decided to make a chair, and when I got all done, I showed it to you, you would absolutely know beyond any shadow of a doubt that this guy doesn't have a clue how to build furniture. He doesn't have the right type of equipment, the right tools. He has no idea what he's doing. Christian, you're God's workmanship. God created you the way you are. God gave you the gifts, the talents, the abilities, the opportunities. He placed you where you're at. You are a result of his workmanship. How good of a job do you think God did? Now, I'm thankful he's not through with us yet. But the verse teaches us very clearly that as Christians, we are God's workmanship. And his intention, then, is that our lives would demonstrate his work. I think at this point we need to ask ourselves, am I like that chair? When I try to witness to people outside the world who know something about my life, do they look at my life and think, this is the kind of God you serve? So God's intention was that our lives would demonstrate his workmanship, that there would be a difference in our lives that would be obvious. And that obviously would be by transformed living. So how well does my life, how well does your life demonstrate God's workmanship? Are you living like a child of God? And are you doing God's work? Because the last phrase there, unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. God wants us to be active in his work. He's gone to all of the work of saving us, of transforming our lives gradually, progressively sanctifying us. Why? So that he can use us in his work and in his ministry. Are you letting him do that? Now, in closing, I'd like to just kind of give an overall, what's the word I'm looking for? Analysis is the wrong word. This 72-year-old brain doesn't work as well as that 30-someone does anymore. But just kind of help me sometimes.
Synopsis?
Okay, I'll use that. That's good. It's not exactly the word I'm grasping for, but synopsis. Here's what the book of Ephesians teaches. Now, it's not everything, but it's a synopsis of what the book of Ephesians teaches. You were, in God's sight before salvation, dead in trespasses and sin, by nature the children of wrath, separated from Christ, with no hope, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, without God, strangers, foreigners, afar off, alienated from the life of God, deceitful, darkness, ignorant, calloused, sensual, greedy, impure, liars, angry, and thieves. Wow. That's how God views a person before salvation. And some people think, well, maybe I'll be good enough. Not going to happen. So that's what we were. And then we once walked in sin, followed the course of this world, followed the prince of the power of the air, lived in the passions of our flesh and minds, and carried out the desires of the body and mind. But God loved us, made us alive together with Christ, raised us up with him, and seated us with him in heavenly places. And now, Christian, you are brought near by the blood of Christ, fellow citizens with the saints. Remember this morning's sermon? Members of the household of God, being built together as a dwelling place for God, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness, and you are light. Quite a transformation. And it's all because of but God.